Iran just fired missiles that traveled over 3,000 kilometers, not toward Israel, not toward a nearby base, toward a joint US and British military installation in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and overnight the entire world had to recalculate just how far Iran can actually reach. Cities like London, Berlin, and Paris are. Now inside that radius, this is not a drill, this is not a threat on paper, this is a demonstrated capability that changed everything on day 26 of this war. 2 missiles were launched toward Diego Garcia, the heavily fortified UK-US base that was specifically built far away from any enemy reach. 1 missile fell short, the other was intercepted by a US warship, but that is not the point. The point is Iran got there. The point is that Israel's former IDF Air Defense Chief confirmed Iran doubled its known range overnight from 2,000 to 4,000 kilometers. The point is the world is no longer dealing with a regional conflict. It is dealing with a global range threat. And while the explosion echoes were still being analyzed by NATO and Western defense ministries, Iran's foreign ministry called it a false flag. They said it never happened. They said it was Israeli disinformation. But the US warship that fired the intercept missile tells a different story, and that contradiction right there is the story of this entire war. Now let us go back to the beginning, because to understand day 26, you need to understand how we even got here. When the United States and Israel launched their first coordinated strikes on Iran, the global consensus among military analysts was simple. This ends in 3 to 5 days. Maximum, Iran would take the hit, absorb the damage, and a ceasefire would follow under international pressure. That was the prediction. That was the expectation. 26 days later, that prediction looks like a bad joke. What started as a targeted military operation has morphed into one of the most complex, multi-front, and consequential wars of the 21st century. Lebanon is burning, Iraq is destabilizing, Saudi oil fields are under drone attack, the Strait of Hormuz, the single most important waterway in the global economy, is in partial disruption. And every morning brings a new headline that was unthinkable a month ago. The war nobody expected to last is not just lasting, it is growing. New countries are being pulled in, new weapons are being deployed, and the diplomatic efforts, while real, are running miles behind the military reality on the ground. Day 1 had a clear objective, day 26 has no clear endgame, and that absence of an endgame is perhaps the most dangerous thing about where we stand right now. Inside Iran, the picture is devastating and deeply human. A raid in southern Tehran killed at least 12 people and wounded 28 more. That same night, explosions in eastern Tehran destroyed a school. Not a military base, not a weapons facility, a school and several residential buildings around it. These are the numbers being reported. The real numbers, given the fog of war, are likely worse. What Al Jazeera's reporters on the ground describe is something that does not fit neatly into a military briefing. They call it total confusion. Iranian civilians are waking up every day to two completely different realities. Their government is making statements about diplomacy, about peace talks, about how negotiations are progressing. And outside their windows, they hear the bombardment, they see the smoke, they feel the missiles. The contradiction between what they are being told and what they are living through has created a psychological crisis layered on top of a physical one. Iran's leadership, for its part, has a clear strategic goal. Analyst Nigar Mortazavi put it plainly. Tehran wants to end this war on its own terms. Not in surrender, not in humiliation, with enough deterrence in place that once this war ends, no one thinks about starting it again. That is the calculation driving every Iranian decision. Right now, and understanding that calculation is essential to understanding why a deal, even if announced tomorrow, may not hold. The Gulf has become a war zone. That sentence would have sounded alarmist 30 days ago. Today it is simply a factual description of geography. A drone struck a fuel tank at Kuwait International Airport and ignited a fire visible from miles away. Kuwait's Civil Aviation Authority activated full emergency protocols. The damage was contained to property, but the message was not. No corner of the Gulf is safe. No airport, no port, no pipeline is beyond reach. Saudi Arabia bore the heaviest blow. The Saudi Ministry of Defense confirmed that its forces intercepted 32 drones and a ballistic missile targeting the eastern province, the single most important strip of land for global oil production, Ras Nura, Gawar, Abqaiq. These are not just Saudi names. These facilities collectively supply a significant portion of the world's daily oil. Hitting them, or even attempting to hit them, is not a military strike. It is an economic weapon aimed at the entire planet. In Bahrain, the attacks claimed a human life. A Moroccan civilian working alongside armed forces was killed in an Iranian strike. One man, one family, one tragedy, buried under the weight of geopolitical headlines. But his death represents what often gets lost in the analysis of this war. Real people from countries not even directly involved are dying because of decisions made in capitals thousands of miles away. 20% of the world's oil moves through a narrow strip of water between Iran and Oman called the Strait of Hormuz. On a normal day, that fact sits quietly in the background of global economics. On day 26 of this war, that fact has become the single most urgent number in international finance, energy policy, and military strategy. The strait is not fully closed, but it is disrupted enough that the ripples are being felt from Manila to Colombo. Iran made a formal statement to the International Maritime Organization saying non-hostile vessels may still transit, but in the middle of an active war, the definition of non-hostile is dangerously ambiguous. Insurance rates for ships passing through have spiked. Several commercial vessels have rerouted entirely, and the longer this uncertainty lasts, the more the global supply chain starts making permanent adjustments that will not easily reverse even after a ceasefire. Sri Lanka ordered a 25% cut in electricity consumption. The Philippines declared a national energy emergency. These are not wealthy nations with large reserves to absorb the shock. These are countries where an energy crisis translates directly into food insecurity, job losses, and civil unrest. Economist Steve Henk warned that beyond oil, the conflict has disrupted supply chains for helium and fertilizer, goods that quietly power hospitals, agriculture, and industry around the world. The energy crisis is not coming. It is already here. President Trump stood before cameras and said Iran gave the United States a very big present. He was upbeat. He smiled. He talked about the Strait of Hormuz opening, about oil and gas, about a deal being close. And in that moment, for a few hours, markets responded with cautious optimism. Then the next missile alert went off in Israel. Then another drone was intercepted over Saudi Arabia, and the optimism quietly evaporated again. The claim at the center of Trump's statement is that a 15-point peace plan has been delivered to Iran, reportedly facilitated by Pakistan's Army Chief General Asim Munir. Iran has not confirmed receiving it. Iran has not confirmed rejecting it either. The silence from Tehran is being read in a dozen different ways by a dozen different analysts, none of them with certainty. What is certain is that Trump's framing, Iran agreed never to seek nuclear weapons, is not a new concession. Iran has said this since 2003. Ayatollah Khamenei issued a religious fatwa against nuclear weapons over 2 decades ago. Trump announced it as a breakthrough. It was not. The deeper contradiction in Trump's position is impossible to ignore. While publicly celebrating a near deal, his administration is simultaneously deploying 3,000 soldiers from the elite 82nd Airborne Division to the Middle East. You do not send the 82nd Airborne to a region where you believe peace is imminent. Military deployments of that scale take weeks to plan, which means the War Cabinet and the Peace Cabinet in Washington are running on 2 entirely separate tracks, and right now the military track is moving faster. The story of Pakistan in this war has been almost entirely buried under the louder headlines, and it should not be. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif stood up and formally offered Islamabad as a neutral negotiating ground for the US and Iran. That is not a small diplomatic gesture. That is a country of 240 million people. Nuclear-armed, Muslim-majority, and strategically positioned, inserting itself into the most volatile geopolitical crisis of the decade. General Asim Munir's role as back-channel facilitator is, if the reports are accurate, perhaps the most consequential thing happening in this war that no one is talking about. Pakistan has historical relationships with both Washington and Tehran. It understands the Islamic world's sensitivities. It understands American strategic priorities. And crucially, it needs this war to end. Pakistan's own economy is under pressure, and a prolonged Gulf crisis spikes oil import costs to levels Islamabad simply cannot sustain. There is something historically significant about this moment. If Pakistan successfully brokers even a partial ceasefire in this war, it rewrites its own role in global diplomacy permanently. For a country too often defined in Western media by its internal challenges, stepping onto this stage as a peacemaker would be a transformation. Whether General Munir's quiet phone calls become a Nobel Peace Prize moment or a footnote in a longer war, that question is still open, but Pakistan is in this story, and it deserves to be seen. While the world debates peace deals and missile ranges, Lebanon is simply dying. Since the offensive escalated on March 2nd, over 1,072 people have been killed and nearly 3,000 wounded, 33 deaths in the last 24 hours alone. These are not numbers from a distant historical conflict. This is happening right now, in real time, in a country that was already on the edge of collapse before a single bomb fell in this latest escalation. Israel has announced it will seize a 30-kilometer security zone inside Lebanese territory, a move Canada has already condemned as a violation of Lebanese sovereignty. A ground invasion south of the Litani River is being openly discussed. Mass evacuations have been ordered in Beirut's southern suburbs. Hezbollah continues firing rockets and drones into northern Israel and the occupied Golan Heights. The cycle has no visible break. Each strike generates a retaliation. Each retaliation justifies the next strike. Iraq is caught in its own impossible position. It relies on the United States economically. It relies on Iran politically and militarily. When a suspected US strike hit a paramilitary base in Anbar and killed 15 people, Iraq could not simply absorb it and move on. The government formally granted Iran-backed militias the right to respond. The Islamic resistance in Iraq then claimed 23 operations against US bases within 24 hours. Iraq summoned both the US and Iranian diplomats. It is a country trying to survive a war between its two most powerful neighbors, while that war is being fought partially on its own soil. Here is the fracture at the heart of any potential peace deal, and it is a fracture that cannot be papered over with diplomatic language. While the United States is at least publicly exploring a negotiated end to this conflict, Israel has stated its position with complete clarity. It is not part of the US-Iran talks. It does not intend to be. And it will not stop military operations until Iran's nuclear capabilities and its missile program are both completely, verifiably, and permanently eliminated. Israel's ambassador Danny Danon said this directly on the record without ambiguity. This is not a negotiating position designed to be walked back later. This is a red line, and it creates a scenario that should terrify anyone hoping for a quick resolution, because even if Trump announces a deal tomorrow, even if Iran signs something, and Pakistan hosts the ceremony and China and France applaud the outcome, Israel can simply continue. Israel is not bound by a US-Iran agreement. It has its own calculations. It has its own timeline. The question of whether Washington can or will restrain Tel Aviv is the central unanswered question of this entire conflict. History suggests the answer is complicated. The US has leverage over Israel, military aid, diplomatic cover at the United Nations, economic relationships, but using that leverage publicly in a way that forces Israel to stop carries enormous political costs domestically for any American president. Trump has shown no indication he is willing to pay that cost. And so Israel's separate war agenda sits like a time bomb inside every peace framework being constructed right now. Every war eventually reaches a fork in the road. Day 26 of the US-Iran war is that fork. The next decisions made in Washington, Tehran, Tel Aviv, and Islamabad will determine which of three very different futures the world wakes up to, and the consequences of each path are not abstract. They are oil prices, food costs, body counts, and the map of the Middle East for the next generation. The first scenario is the deal. Pakistan's mediation holds. Trump gets his Hormuz agreement. Iran accepts enough of the 15 points to declare a domestic political victory. Markets stabilize, oil retreats from its highs. The world exhales. But this scenario has a fatal flaw. Israel does not stop, and a ceasefire that excludes Israel is not a ceasefire. It is a pause. The second scenario is full escalation. Israel rejects any framework, strikes deeper into Iran. Iran retaliates against Gulf infrastructure with everything it has left, and oil crosses $200 a barrel. At that price, the global economy does not slow down. It breaks, recessions follow, governments fall. The third and perhaps most likely scenario is the long war, a grinding, months-long attrition where neither side achieves its goals, both sides take enormous damage, and the Middle East emerges fundamentally restructured in ways no analyst has yet been able to fully map. Which path do we take? That depends on one question nobody can answer yet. Can Trump actually control Israel? And right now, on day 26, the honest answer is nobody knows.